May I see you?
What do you mean?
See you in my way.
Sure.
What kind of scar is this?
Fight.
This makes you look more handsome.
Thanks.
You are the murderer.
Yes.
Then why don't you kill me?
I don't know the reason. I just want you by my side. Marco Bellini knows who you are. Tonight's attack was just the beginning.
Vera trembled.
What's going to happen?
You will stay here.
Alessio stated, his tone leaving no room for argument.
Starting tonight. In one of the guest rooms in this pavilion, your shop will be closed temporarily. All your needs will be provided for.
This wasn't an offer. It was a command.
Stay here?
It's not a request.
Alessio asserted, stepping closer. Vera could feel the aura of power and controlled rage emanating from him.
It's the only way you stay alive.
Living in the Conti estate was a disorienting experience. Vera was placed in a guest room larger than her entire apartment. The silk sheets felt cool against her skin. The bathroom was made of marble, and exquisite meals were delivered to her door 3 times a day. It was the most luxurious prison in the world, but a prison nonetheless. Her window would only open a crack, and she could always feel the stationary presence of a guard in the hallway. Her only freedom was the greenhouse. However, the atmosphere there had changed. It was no longer their neutral paradise. It now felt like Alessio's domain where Vera was permitted to enter. Mr. Conti had almost completely vanished. The man who accompanied her now was Alessio. Quieter, more intense, and his dangerous aura was so thick Vera could feel it in the air. He no longer asked about the flowers. He observed more. Sometimes Vera would feel his gaze so intensely. It was as if he were trying to dissect her soul. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vera knew she was saved, protected, but she also knew she was a captive. The big question was, a captive of what? Of Bellini or of this man? The answer came on a bright afternoon, a week after she had moved in. Vera was fertilizing a row of labyrinth dahlias when Alessio entered the greenhouse, speaking on the phone. He was speaking in Italian, his tone fast and sharp. Vera didn't understand the language, but she understood the tone. It was a tone of cold command, filled with merciless authority. The same tone from that night in the alley. Vera tried to ignore it, continuing to focus on her work. Then Alessio uttered a name that made Vera's blood run cold. Rico, the name was spoken with a dismissive tone, followed by a torrent of Italian sentences. Vera's heart began to pound uncontrollably. She stopped working, her fingers clenched around a handful of rich soil. Alessio seemed to end his call in frustration. There was an annoyed sigh. And then Vera heard the sound engraved in her nightmares. Click! The opening of the silver Zippo lighter's lid. Furt! The flint wheel spinning, futilely as no cigarette followed. It was a reflex, the habit of a man deep in thought. Cluck! The lighter was closed. That was enough. There were no more doubts, no more coincidences. The final puzzle piece had fallen into place with a deafening click. The man standing just a few meters away, the man whose hand had once gently guided hers, was the killer. A cold fear coursed through Vera, but behind it, something else grew. A burning need to hear the truth from his own lips. She couldn't live in this lie anymore. She set down her tools very slowly. She straightened her back and turned to face the direction where Alessio stood.
Alessio,
she said. His name felt strange on her tongue, spoken without a title for the first time. Alessio didn't answer, but Vera could feel she had his full attention.
I have to know.
Vera continued, her voice trembling but firm. She took one step forward.
That night, in the alley.
When the man named Rico died.
She paused, letting the heavy silence hang between them.
Whose voice did I hear, Alessio?
The silence in the greenhouse was so total. Vera could hear her own heart thundering in her ears. She could feel Alessio's sharp gaze, analyzing her, assessing her. Maybe he would lie. Maybe he would laugh at her. Maybe he would.
You already know the answer, don't you, Vera?
Alessio finally answered. His voice was very quiet, devoid of emotion, a statement of fact, not a question. Tears began to well in Vera's eyes, but she held them back.
I want to hear it from you.
Alessio moved, his slow footsteps closing the distance until he stood directly in front of her. Vera could smell his sandalwood cologne, this time untainted by blood.
You heard my voice.
He admitted without a shred of remorse. Vera's world felt as if it had split in two. To hear the confession directly was a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat.
Why?
Why am I still alive?
She whispered, the most important question of all. Alessio was silent for a moment, as if asking himself the same question.
I should have killed you that night.
He said, his voice low and hoarse with brutal honesty.
My instinct, my logic, all my experience as what I am, told me to eliminate you. It was the only logical move.
He stepped even closer. Vera didn't retreat.
But I couldn't.
He continued, and for the first time, Vera heard a flicker of confusion in his cold voice.
I saw your name on the report, a blind florist, and I couldn't do it.
He paused.
And to this day, I still don't know why.
That confession was more terrifying than any threat. She was alive not out of mercy, but because of an anomaly, an obsession the monster himself didn't understand. They stood there, in the middle of the paradise of flowers they had created together, now trapped in their terrible truth. All the masks were off. She was his witness, his captive. And he was her killer, her protector. And somehow, the strange bond between them had now become far stronger and far more dangerous. The silence after Alessio's confession was heavier than steel. The air in the warm greenhouse felt suffocating. Vera should have run. She should have screamed. A small, sane part of her was telling her to do just that. But her body didn't move. Strangely, knowing the worst truth felt like a kind of relief. There were no more riddles. All that was left was the monster, in human form, standing before her. Alessio remained still, tense. Vera could feel the tension in the vibration of the air, as if he were a string pulled taut to its limit, waiting to either snap or be played. He was waiting for her reaction, fear, hatred, devastation. Vera gave him something he never expected. Slowly she stepped forward, closing the distance between them until the tips of her shoes almost touched his leather ones. She could feel the heat radiating from his body.
May I see you?
She whispered. Alessio didn't answer, confused.
What do you mean?
My way.
Vera replied, and with a courage that came from nowhere, she raised her trembling hand into the air between them, a request. Alessio froze. Touch was an intrusion, a weakness. No one had ever touched him like this, without calculated permission, without a purpose of business or violence. He should have stepped back, swatted the hand away, but he didn't. After a moment of silence that felt like an eternity, he inclined his head slightly, a wordless consent. Carefully, as if approaching a dangerous wild animal, Vera touched her fingertips to Alessio's jaw. His skin was warm, with the faint, fine stubble of a fresh shave. Her fingers began to explore, tracing the hard, strong line of his jaw, a line that knew no compromise. She moved upward to his high cheekbones, then along the side of his face. Near his right eyebrow, she found a small relief, a long-healed scar. Her finger paused there. This was a map of his violent past, physical proof of the world he commanded. Alessio held his breath. Vera's touch wasn't accusing. There was no disgust or fear in it. There was only a pure, gentle curiosity. It felt calming. The weight of the world's gaze seemed to lift, replaced by the soft exploration of a woman who couldn't see his faults, only feel his form. Vera's fingers descended to his lips. She traced them with the lightest pressure, the same lips that had spoken cold sentences in the alley, and also poetic words about dahlias. Their shape was firm, but not as hard as she had imagined. Beneath her touch, she felt them part slightly in a near-silent exhale. A strange comfort began to envelop Alessio. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. For years he had lived behind masks, the ghost. Mr. Conti, the boss. He was always seen as a symbol. Not a man, but under Vera's touch, he was just a collection of contours, warmth, and scars. For the first time, he felt seen without being judged. Vera grew bolder, her hands now cupping Alessio's face. She could feel the strong, steady pulse in his neck. She brought her face closer, her sense of smell catching, the scent of sandalwood and the ozone from the recent rain. a scent that would now forever be Alessio's to her. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe she lifted her face slightly, or maybe Alessio lowered his head. All she knew was that the lips she had just explored with her fingers were now meeting her own. The kiss wasn't passionate or demanding. It felt like a surrender, soft, slow, and filled with all the words they could not speak. There was the salt of Vera's tears, which had finally fallen, and there was the bitter taste of their dark truth. But beneath it, there was an undeniable warmth. For Vera, it was a way of accepting both sides of this man, the monster and the lover of flowers. For Alessio, it was his greatest moment of weakness, and strangely, the moment he felt most whole. When they broke the kiss, they didn't pull away. Their foreheads remained touching, their breaths mingling in the humid greenhouse air. There was nothing left to say. In the middle of the garden that had witnessed sin and obsession, a new, deeper, and more dangerous bond had been forged, not in blood or fear, but in silent touch and acceptance. After the night of the confession and that fragile kiss, a strange, heavy peace settled over them. Vera's fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. She was no longer afraid of the unknown. Now she was afraid of what she knew, that she was bound to a killer, and even more terrifying, she no longer wanted to run from him. They began to build a new routine. Sometimes they would have dinner together, in a comfortable silence on one of the terraces overlooking the gardens. Alessio would recount the history of a particular dahlia variety, and Vera would listen, building her image of the man even further, a man whose knowledge of beauty was as deep as his experience with violence. This fragile bubble, their isolated world within the estate, felt almost normal. However, Alessio's ritual didn't stop just because Vera was now within his reach. One morning, Vera awoke to a familiar yet misplaced floral scent. On the nightstand beside her bed, in a slender crystal vase, stood a new perfect white dahlia, a Gitz perfection. She recognized it from the contour of its dense, rounded petals. Alessio must have entered her room while she slept and placed it there. The act felt both deeply intimate and deeply unsettling. The mysterious gift now had a face, and that face was her killer lover's. Her breath hitched. In her shop, the dahlias had been a mystery. After his confession, they were a reminder of his crime. But now, given so directly like this, it felt like a statement, a silent celebration. When she met Alessio in the greenhouse a short while later, she couldn't stop herself. She had to know.
The dahlia in my room this morning.
She began, her voice soft.
It was from you, right?
Of course.
Alessio replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world.
The white dahlias that always came to my shop.
Vera continued, her heart beginning to pound.
Those were from you too, weren't they? Not from a secret admirer.
Alessio stopped watering a plant and turned to face her fully.
That's right. They were all from me.
Vera gathered all her courage.
Why, Alessio?
Why always white dahlias? What do they mean?
Alessio set down his watering can. He walked closer, his movements graceful and deliberate. He stopped in front of Vera, his gaze so intense she felt she could feel it on her skin.
Each of those flowers,
He said softly, his voice a cold, honest confession.
has a meaning.
He reached out and gently touched Vera's cheek, his thumb tracing her cheekbone.
The world outside these walls. It's dirty, Vera, cruel. Sometimes, I am forced to do things that make this world dirtier. To take a life.
Vera held her breath, the most terrible sense of foreboding creeping over her.
Every time I am forced to do that,
Alessio continued, his eyes never leaving her face.
I bring you one white flower, as a reminder of the purity I destroy out there, and the purity I'm desperately trying to protect in here.
He took a deep breath, the most twisted of confessions.
It is my selfish penance, a ritual to balance the darkness with your light.
Vera's world collapsed for a second time, and this time it was far worse. She took a step back, pulling away from Alessio's touch as if she'd been electrocuted. Nausea rose in her throat.
So,
She whispered in horror.
every flower is a life?
Alessio just looked at her, his silence an affirmation.
You
Vera stammered, the horror choking her words.
made me their tombstone.
A devastating understanding washed over her. The row of vases in her room, which she had brought from her apartment, was no longer a collection of mysterious gifts. It was a cemetery. A grim memorial garden, where every perfectly blooming petal was an epitaph for a lost soul. She was no longer just a witness, or a captive, or even a lover. Alessio, in his twisted obsession, had made her an angel who recorded the dead. He had turned her into a part of his murderous ritual, staining her innocence with the blood of others, without ever having touched her. Vera stared blankly in the direction where Alessio stood, now seeing him with horrifying clarity. Behind the man who loved flowers, behind the gentle lover, the monster stared back, and that monster had just shown her how deep and twisted the abyss in his soul truly was. Vera fled from the greenhouse, but she couldn't run from the truth. Every step back to the pavilion felt heavy, as if she were dragging chains made of dozens of lives. In her luxurious room, she stared at the row of white dahlias on her windowsill. The flowers no longer looked beautiful. Now they looked like tombstones of white porcelain, each one a silent monument to the sins of the man she had allowed into her heart. She wanted to scream, to smash every vase to pieces, but all that came out was a frozen silence. Alessio didn't follow her. He gave her space, perhaps knowing that no words could fix what he had just broken. Their fragile bubble had burst, leaving behind sharp fragments of a brutal reality. The suffocating silence lasted for several hours. Then it was shattered by an explosion. Not a sharp crack like a gunshot, but a deep, rumbling blast, boom, that shook the entire building to its foundations. The glasses in Vera's room rattled. A moment later, deafening alarm sirens began to wail throughout the estate. The outside world had come for them. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, a symphony of chaos. There were the rapid bursts of automatic rifles, punctuated by the deeper blasts of shotguns. Vera dropped to the floor, her hands covering her ears, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her door was kicked open violently. Vera screamed.
Vera!
It was Alessio's voice, but it was a voice she had never heard before. Not a poetic whisper, nor a cold confession. This was a harsh bark full of command, the voice of a commander in the midst of battle. A strong hand gripped her arm, pulling her to her feet. The grip was no longer gentle but hard and urgent.
We have to move, now!
He shouted over the wail of the sirens.
What's happening?
Vera sobbed.
Bellini. He brought his whole army.
Alessio answered curtly. He pushed her into motion, his body acting as a shield for hers.
Stay behind me. Don't stop no matter what.
They ran down a hallway now filled with a thin haze of smoke. The sounds of gunfire and shouting in Italian grew closer. Alessio held a pistol in his other hand, occasionally pausing to fire measured return shots at enemies Vera couldn't see.
Where are we going?
Vera asked in a panic.
To the only place we can defend.
Alessio replied.
The greenhouse.
Their sanctuary, the site of their confession, was now to be their final fortress. They managed to reach the greenhouse door. Alessio pushed Vera inside and quickly locked the steel door behind them. Inside, several of his most trusted men, including Luca, were already in position, using marble benches and large pots as cover. The greenhouse was no longer silent. The sound of bullets hitting the reinforced glass was like deadly hail. Several glass panels in the roof shattered, sending a rain of dahlia petals and glass shards to the floor.
They're surrounding us, boss,
Luca yelled. Alessio pushed Vera down, taking cover behind a thick oak potting table.
Stay here. Keep your head down.
He commanded. Vera huddled on the cold floor, smelling the scents of earth, flowers, and now, the sharp tang of gunpowder. She heard Alessio barking orders in Italian, organizing the defense with deadly efficiency. In the midst of the chaos, a stray bullet shattered a ceramic pot nearby. A pristine white petal from an Eveline dahlia fell into Vera's lap. Now stained with dust and dirt, Vera stared at the petal in her trembling hand. The irony was devastating. The paradise Alessio had built to protect her purity had now become their battlefield. And amidst the rain of bullets and falling petals, Vera realized that to survive this night, she would have to fully trust the monster who had just shattered her heart. The war outside was merely a reflection of the war raging inside her. The chaos was a terrible orchestra, and Vera, for the first time, could understand each of its instruments. Amidst the roar of weapons and the shriek of alarms, her trained hearing began to separate the sounds. the squeak of rubber soles on the wet floor to the west, the metallic click of a magazine being changed near the door. A hoarse whisper in Italian from just outside a broken window. At first she just huddled in fear. She was a florist, not a soldier. But then she heard one of Alessio's men groan in pain, followed by the sound of a falling body. They were outnumbered. Desperation began to hang in the air. And in the midst of that desperation, Vera made a choice. She couldn't fight, but she could hear.
Alessio!
She called out, her voice barely audible over the din.
Stay down, Vera.
Alessio shot back, his voice strained as he fired 2 quick shots.
2 men.
Vera said louder, more certain.
3 meters to your right, behind the row of Arabian Night black dahlias. 1 is reloading.
Alessio hesitated for a fraction of a second, but there was a conviction in Vera's voice he couldn't ignore. He signaled to Luca, and then they both moved in unison. 2 muffled shots erupted, followed by 2 thuds. The momentary silence in that sector confirmed Vera's information. Alessio glanced towards the still crouching Vera, a brief, savage look of admiration flashing across his face. From that moment on, Vera became his eyes.
On the roof. Someone is crawling on the steel beams above us. East door. They're trying to breach it.
They became a strange and deadly unit. Alessio was the sword, and Vera was his auditory shield. They managed to repel the first wave of attackers, turning the greenhouse into a lethal fortress. But Marco Bellini wasn't going to give up that easily. Suddenly, a small explosion shattered a glass wall on the far side, and Marco Bellini himself leaped through, followed by his 2 personal bodyguards. He shot one of Alessio's remaining men before anyone could react. Now it was just Alessio and Luca against 3 men, including Marco. The fight became brutal and personal. Alessio moved with the ghostly speed and efficiency that was his namesake, but Marco was a wild and desperate fighter. In the middle of a fierce struggle with Marco, one of Bellini's bodyguards managed to slip to Alessio's side, raising his knife to strike from a blind spot. Alessio wouldn't see it in time, but Vera heard it. The whisper of a held breath, the rustle of a jacket's fabric, the soft sound of metal being drawn.
Alessio, behind you.
She shrieked with all her might. Alessio reacted instinctively. He shoved Marco away and spun around just in time to shoot the bodyguard. He was saved. But Vera's scream had drawn attention. Marco Bellini, now panting and knowing he had lost, looked at Alessio with pure hatred. Then his eyes shifted to the source of the voice, towards Vera, still hiding behind the table. A vile, triumphant smile spread across his face. He couldn't kill Alessio, but he could destroy his soul. Time seemed to slow down for Alessio. He saw the barrel of Marco's pistol turn, no longer pointing at him but at Vera.
No!
Alessio roared, trying to lunge forward, but he was too far. There wasn't enough time. Bang! The gunshot sounded different. It echoed through the greenhouse, silencing all other sounds. It wasn't the sound of Alessio being shot, nor was it Marco. Vera flinched. Her body jerked back as if struck by an unseen force. A look of shock and confusion crossed her face. She slowly slumped to the floor, her hand going to her chest. When she pulled her hand away, her fingers were wet with dark red. Total silence enveloped the greenhouse. Alessio stared at Vera's fallen body. Then he looked at the triumphantly grinning Marco Bellini. Something inside Alessio broke. The sound that came from his throat was no longer human. It was a primal roar of pure rage and anguish. The cold efficiency of the ghost vanished instantly. All that was left was pure fury. He didn't use his pistol. With terrifying speed, he launched himself at Marco, tackling him to the ground. He was no longer fighting to win. He fought to annihilate. Blow after blow he landed, each punch accompanied by a roar of pain that came not from Marco, but from himself. Luca shot Bellini's last bodyguard, then stood frozen, watching in horror as his always controlled boss unleashed all his fury, tearing his enemy apart with his bare hands amidst the ruined flower petals. When it was over, Alessio stood panting, his body splattered with blood that was not all his own. Marco Bellini lay lifeless at his feet. The war was won. Alessio slowly turned. His wild, grief-stricken eyes fell upon Vera's still form, lying amongst the broken dahlias. And for the first time in his life, Alessio Conti, the ghost, felt absolute defeat. Alessio didn't feel the pain from his wounds. He didn't hear the shouts of his remaining men or the sound of Luca calling his name. His entire world had narrowed to a single point. The figure of Vera, lying on the floor of the ruined greenhouse. He knelt by her side, sweeping away shards of glass and stained flower, petals with gentle movements that contrasted with the violence of moments before. He lifted her head onto his lap. Bright red blood had soaked through her dress, creating a horrifying contrast with her pale skin.
Vera.
He whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. Vera's eyes fluttered open, no longer focused, staring somewhere over Alessio's shoulder. A faint, fragile smile touched her lips.
It's funny,
She whispered, her breath shallow.
all this time, I wanted to know what color it was.
Vera, don't talk. Hold on, help is coming.
Alessio said, panic creeping into his usually calm voice. Vera's weak hand lifted, her blood-stained fingers touching Alessio's cheek.
I can see it now, Alessio.
She whispered.
Your red dahlia. It's so beautiful.
Alessio didn't understand. There were no red dahlias near them, only a sea of white, purple, and black flowers now stained with blood. But then he realized Vera was seeing her own blood, spilled because of his world, and in her final delirious moments, she was describing it as something beautiful. It was a final forgiveness he didn't deserve.
The color. It's warm,
Vera's eyes began to lose their light.
like your touch.
Her last breath escaped in a soft sigh and then silence. The hand on his cheek went limp and fell away. Vera was gone. Alessio hugged her lifeless body, his face buried in her hair that smelled of earth and flowers. There were no tears. There were no screams. There was only an emptiness so vast and destructive it felt like a black hole sucking all light and sound from the universe. Luca approached, placed a hand on his boss's shoulder, then drew it back, knowing that no words could reach the place where Alessio was now. In the garden of his victory, surrounded by the corpses of his enemies, Alessio Conti had lost everything. 1 year later, the Bellini family was no more. They were extinct, annihilated from the map of the underworld with a brutality that became legend. The Conti family now reigned supreme, their power absolute and undisputed. The name Alessio Conti was whispered with a deeper fear than ever before, but the ghost had died that night with Vera. The man who remained was something else, something colder, emptier. His cruelty no longer had an artistic efficiency. It was now mechanical, passionless, emotionless. He was a king sitting on a throne built from ash, ruling over a kingdom that no longer gave him any satisfaction. The greenhouse had been rebuilt, more magnificent, more perfect than before. Every glass panel bulletproof, every system computerized. But there was no longer a soul within it. Alessio stood in the middle of that greenhouse. The space was no longer filled with the vibrant, varied colors of dahlias. The entire room, from end to end, was now planted with only one type of flower, in one color. Thousands of Arabian night dahlias, their pointed petals the deepest shade of red, so dark they looked black. The color of dried blood. This was no longer a garden. It was a mausoleum, an eternal monument to his failure. He no longer touched the flowers. He no longer felt the soil. He just stood there every day for an hour, a king visiting his queen's tomb, a sinner staring at an ocean of his irredeemable sin. He had gotten all the blood and power he ever wanted, but his dahlia, the only light that had ever grown in his darkness, had fallen forever, leaving him cursed to eternally mourn in a garden that would never truly bloom again. Luca's point of view. Logic was the religion Luca had followed his entire life. In their world, emotion was a liability. Doubt was a disease, and leaving a trace was a death sentence. For 10 years he had served Alessio Conti, a man who was the perfect embodiment of that logic. Alessio was the ghost, a cold and flawless strategist. At least until the girl showed up. That night, amidst the ruins of the greenhouse, logic no longer reigned. Luca moved like a machine. He gave orders in a low, firm voice. Secure the perimeter. Count the casualties, both theirs and the enemy's. Summon the wolves. His cleanup crew that could make a dozen bodies and a battlefield disappear before sunrise. His hands were steady, his mind clear. This was his expertise. But every few seconds, his eyes would unconsciously return to the center of the room, to the anomaly his logic could not process. His boss, Alessio Conti, was kneeling on the dirty floor, cradling the body of a flower girl. The entire kingdom he had just won with blood meant nothing. The entire world had narrowed to the lifeless figure in his lap. Luca remembered their first conversation about the girl.
She's a loose end. We should finish it.
Luca had said at the time. It was the right move, the logical move, eliminating one helpless, blind witness. Easy, clean, and efficient. But Alessio had said no. For the first time, Alessio had chosen the illogical path. His obsession with flowers, and now with the girl, had created a blind spot. Luca accepted it, because even a king was entitled to one small eccentricity, as long as that eccentricity didn't endanger the kingdom. He was wrong. That small eccentricity turned out to be an abyss that had now swallowed his king whole. Alessio's roar when the girl was shot was not a sound Luca had ever heard a human make. It was a sound from the depths of hell, a tearing of the soul, and his violence against Marco Bellini afterward. That wasn't an execution. It was a brutal sacrificial ritual. The precise ghost had vanished, replaced by a wounded beast. Now, that beast had returned to its lair, licking a wound that would never heal.
Boss?
Luca called softly after giving the last order to his men.
We have to move. We can't stay here.
Alessio didn't stir, as if he hadn't heard. He just kept staring at the girl's face, one hand gently cleaning a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Luca sighed. For the first time in a decade, he didn't know what to do. He could face dozens of hitmen. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals. He could make any problem disappear. But he couldn't fight this. He couldn't fight grief. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alessio moved. He raised his head and Luca felt a chill run down his spine. His boss's eyes, the eyes that were usually sharp as a hawk's, filled with cold calculation and intelligence, were now empty, not sad. This was worse. This was an absence. As if someone had scooped the soul from his body, leaving only a functioning shell.
Luca,
Alessio said. His voice was flat, without resonance, like the sound from a machine.
Yes, boss.
no one touches her.
Alessio commanded.
Call my private forensic team. Prepare her properly.
And after that?
Luca asked carefully.
Prepare the finest funeral.
Alessio continued, his eyes returning to Vera.
On this property. Near the lake.
The logic in Luca's mind screamed. Burying a civilian, a witness to a murder, on private property was insanity. A permanent trace that could never be erased. An incredible security risk. But looking at Alessio's empty eyes, Luca knew that logic no longer applied. He just nodded.
Yes, boss.
As his men began to move to carry out the order, Luca stood still for a moment, observing the scene before him. The greatest victory in the Conti family's history, and their shattered king, kneeling among dead flowers, cradling his only defeat. Luca realized his duty had fundamentally changed tonight. Before, his job was to advise a brilliant king. Now his job was to hold the crown for an empty throne. And he had no idea how long their kingdom could survive without a soul at its center.